already did the Pledge of Allegiance, and we already read the Citizens Addressing Council. So we'll go right into our committee reports. And first off is Mrs. Angeloff, Planning, Annexation, and Codes.
Thank you, Mr. President. This was a special Planning, Annexation, and Codes meeting. We started at 7 o'clock. All members were present except for Mrs. Colburn. All council was present, along with guests as noted on my sheet. Copies of discussion, legislation requests, we had none, but we have two pieces of current legislation. First one is resolution number 147, 2020, titled Amending Barberton Codified Ordinances, Chapter 670, Chapter 1422, and Chapter 1444. We had a first reading November 30th, second reading December 20th. There was no questions in regards to that piece of legislation. The second legislation I have is resolution number 148, 2020, titled Amending Barberton Codified Ordinances, Chapter 1478, Rental Registration. We had a first reading November 30th, second reading December 14th. I read the new and improved section H regarding the breakdown of the fees, and we added section M, and that was, it was voted on and it was passed unanimously. We have one appointment to the Design Review Board, Willie Jenkins, and that was for a 3-year term starting January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2023. And that was passed. And we adjourned at 7:20 with no miscellaneous. But I do want to make a correction. We do not have a Board of Zoning Appeals. That was postponed till January.
Thank you.
With that, I pass.
Thank you. Next up is Streets, Sidewalks, and Lighting with Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. We had a special street, sidewalk, and lighting today, December 14th, 2020 at 641 in the Active Adult Center. All committee members were present, and council members were present, minus Mrs. Colburn, and guests noted on my sheet. We had 2 requests for legislation today. The first request was titled Authorized Payment to the City of Akron, authorizing payment in the amount of $15,179.03 to the City of Akron for the final project construction costs performed within the city, or Barberton city limits on West State Street. This project, over the cost over the estimate was due to concrete being used over asphalt from our original estimate that we had, although that the concrete was in the original contract, but the cost that we had was for asphalt. So that is the $15,000 is 20% or 20% of that. Question was asked. This did come from the Permissive Road Tax Fund. For that, that will be coming forward. The second draft piece of ordinance is titled Entering a Contract GPD Group, authorizing the mayor to enter into contract with GPD for general professional engineering services, including but not limited to permissive and residential street resurfacing programs, infrastructure improvement, design management, street crack sealing, street striping, and miscellaneous engineering management services. Mrs. DeBevick asked about the general contracts, minimum amounts, if there was any minimum amounts on that. There was no minimum amounts. I believe it was Mr. Heidick asked about the budgeted money for this, and the money that was budgeted for this year was not spent as part of the side road program with GPD. This GPD's hourly rate stayed the same, so there was no increase to the hourly rates or services provided, and that passed. For miscellaneous discussion, Mr. Tracy has sent an email out to all council members asking for road recommendations for the resurfacing of 2021. and ask the sooner we get them out, the better, with a December 31st deadline. We adjourned at 6:58 PM, and with that, I pass.
Thank you very much. Okay, city utilities, Mrs. Coburn's not here, so Mrs. Fry will be taking over.
Okay, that pause. Thank you, Mr. President. As you indicated, Mrs. Coburn is not here tonight, so I was chair for the Utilities Committee meeting. We had two pieces of legislation on the agenda for tonight. The first was ordinance number 154, 2020, title Electric Aggregation Program, and the second was ordinance number 155, 2020, enter into contract with Green and Hager. We had no new requests for legislation. There was no miscellaneous discussion, and the meeting was adjourned at 7:28 PM.
Thank you. Public welfare and safety, Mrs. DeVette.
Thank you, Mr. President. Public welfare and safety met this evening here in the Active Adult Center about 6:10. All members of the committee were present, as well as all others noted. We have two requests for legislation for next week. The first one is to enter into contract with the Law Department Defender's Office of Summit County, authorizing the law director to enter into a one-year contract with the Legal Defender's Office of Summit County to provide legal representation to indigent persons in the amount of $170 per case. As Mr. Heidick indicated, there was not a raise from last year, and I also shared that each community is responsible for paying their own portion of the usage of this program. So we will be voting on that next week. The second request is referred to finance. It's a draft ordinance titled Appropriation Fire Department, appropriating $2,846.43 from the unappropriated item of the general fund to the fire department operating budget. This is a reimbursement from the state. Sorry, I've written that down. From the Ohio Department of Public Safety to be used toward COVID-related EMS supplies. So that would refer to finance. As far as miscellaneous discussion goes, I read an email that was sent to me regarding concern about an objection to a liquor license at 555 West Ford Avenue. Some council members responded to comments and questions posed by the applicant regarding a discussion on this topic last week. Moving forward, I will forward the emails to the Chief and Safety Director to inquire about the objections and copy council members as well, and then follow up. And with that, public welfare and safety will pass.
Thank you. Rules, marketing, development, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rules, marketing, and development met on December 14th today. In the Active Adult Center, all members present and other guests as noted. We had no request for legislation to call for, and we also had no miscellaneous discussion as well. We adjourned at 6:41, and with that, I pass.
Thank you. Environmental health and social services, Mr. Dave.
Thank you, Mr. President. We met, and at the Adult Center, all members were present, and we had no news, no regulation, nothing going on. I had no paperwork here from last week, so there's nothing going on. There's none. There we go. And then I pass.
Okay, thank you very much. City properties, parks and recreation, Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. City Properties, Parks and Recreation met today, December 14th, 2020 at 6 PM in the Active Adult Center. Committee members present, minus Councilor Coburn, and all others noted were here. We had no new requests for legislation. Our miscellaneous discussion centered around a skate park, how we're gathering all sorts of information, plus to coordinate with all departments, anybody that had previously worked on this, see any sort of markups, plans, etc., to basically get all information possible to be able to make some informed decisions. And the commission will have a special meeting December 15th here at 4:30. We adjourn at 6:07. With that, I pass.
Thank you. Finance and Personnel, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance and Personnel Committee met at the Active Adult Center tonight, Monday, December 14th. The meeting started at 7:28. All members of the committee were present, as well as all council members, with the exception of Mrs. Coburn, and all other guests as noted on my meeting sheet. We had one piece of legislation, we had one piece of legislation, two pieces of legislation on the, one piece of legislation. It is confusing. All right, we have one piece of legislation on the agenda for tonight, and it was to adopt the RETA rules and regulation. Mr. Flager has sent all the rules and regulations to all of council, and they can refer to that if they have any questions, and that passed tonight. We had two requests for legislation. The first was a draft ordinance titled Year-End Appropriation Amendment, and this is modifying appropriations within certain department and funds in order to cover expenditures to the end of the fiscal year. The second piece of legislation was a draft ordinance titled 2021 Temporary Budget, adopting a temporary budget for various funds of the city of Barberton for the period beginning January 1st, 2021, and providing for the administration. This is something that we do every year, as we do with year-end appropriations, and the temporary budget consists of about a quarter of what the normal budget would be for each of the departments and budget items throughout the year. The third piece of draft legislation was an appropriation that was for the fire department. It was referred to us from safety. It was an appropriation in the amount of $2,846.43 from the unappropriated item of the general fund to the fire department operating budget. As I said, it was referred from safety, and Mrs. Bevick just explained what it was for. It is money from the Ohio Department of Public Safety to reimburse the fire department for COVID-related EMS supplies. There was no miscellaneous discussion, and we adjourned at 7:32, and with that, Finance and Personnel will pass.
Thank you. Okay, anything else from the good of the body here? Mr. Grigg.
Just so everybody's aware, Browns are up by 7.
All right. Anyone else? Mrs. Beck?
Thank you, Mr. President. Did we forget to excuse Joyce so she can get paid?
We have to, yeah, we need to. Yes.
So I would like to make a motion that we excuse Mrs. Coburn from the meetings this evening.
Okay. And Mr. Height?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to excuse Councilor Coburn's absence.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good. One more thing. I'd like to welcome Lori Price back there hiding behind the screen, our new clerk.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, everybody be careful on the way home.
Go straight home, right?
Straight home.
Only have till 10.